Are these new rules going to take over your life on October 2nd? Will you become a criminal? I think I will. I commit crimes every waking hour, according to these new rules, and I will probably be imprisoned for them. How about you? Are you ready for this? Ready for what, you're saying? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? We don't even know what the global elites are passing into international law and what it means until it actually comes crashing down on us. This week, the United Nations is meeting in New York City for what they're calling the Summit for the Future. If you follow this channel, you already know that. You know it is what they're calling the most important meeting of a generation. But what I didn't know until just last week is they are adding something terrible to what is already bad. And we need to give a shout out to a community member, Richard Longacre, for letting me know about this. And by extension, letting all of us know about this. Everything about your life is going to change, and it's going to begin to change next month. The summit's primary piece of global legislation is something called the Pact for the Future, which will change the way the world is governed, taking power away from the nations, taking away their national sovereignty, and giving it to the United Nations. Want to know why the leaders of the nations are lining up to do this? This recent video tells you why, and also the biblical support prophesying that this would happen. The link will be at the end of this teaching. Be sure to watch for it. So in addition to taking away the freedoms provided by your own nation, the UN is adding something extra, something especially challenging to that Summit for the Future, the Convention on Combating Cybercrime. Human rights organizations and information technology experts have called it a threat to democracy and the free world. Here is what the Austrian digital rights group Epicenter Works says about it. One of the world's most dangerous surveillance treaties was approved to standing ovation. End of quote. The UN General Assembly is now due to vote on this during the Summit for the Future this week. If passed, these worldwide rules will change your life, at least until Jesus returns. The proposed international treaty aims to combat cybercrime and improve international cooperation between law enforcement agencies. Like so many international agreements, the stated purpose on the agreement sounds great. Who doesn't want to stop cybercrime? But what if they define cybercrime as anything you say or think that goes against their stated agenda? For this exact reason, more than 100 human rights and civil rights organizations around the world have warned that this treaty is a serious threat to our human rights. According to them, the planned agreement would oblige UN member states to introduce comprehensive measures to spy on their citizens. Quote, the contract is really a surveillance agreement with too few provisions on data protection and human rights. End of quote. So says netpolitik.org. Who is behind this? It all started with a UN resolution initiated in 2019 by Russia, China, Iran, Egypt, Sudan, and Uzbekistan. None of these guys are the bastions of free speech. So a treaty emanating from them is suspect right from the start. European states have proposed changes, but according to the experts, the resulting compromise does not even meet the conditions necessary to preserve privacy and human rights. How about the USA? Well, they're going right along with it, hook, line, and sinker. No changes proposed at all. All the nations seem to want to do away with free speech. It is so indicative of what they want to accomplish. It is so much easier when no one can argue or disagree with you, isn't it? On August 13th, the International Chamber of Commerce, the world's largest representative of the private sector, openly called on the UN not to adopt this convention at the General Assembly in September. Quote, if governments fail again to protect the international human rights, then new, dangerous norms created in international law will haunt us for decades. Now, we're talking about this as a treaty, but it isn't a treaty. If it was, that would mean the USA, Europe, Australia, South Africa, Philippines, wherever you happen to live, would have a chance to override it, correct? No, they won't. This isn't a treaty. It's a change to the UN Charter, a treaty that your nation has already signed off on. Slick, isn't it? You sign off on a treaty 75 years ago, and now they changed the rules on you. We in the USA will be told that just by signing these agreements, treaties is good enough. They don't need to be ratified by our Congresses to become full-blown legal treaties, superseding, of course, the U.S. Constitution, and binding U.S. citizens to these new laws or agreements and controls. The only way to opt out is to leave the United Nations. Doesn't sound like a bad option to me, but that's my opinion. Now, this change to the UN Charter is going to put journalists, whistleblowers, Bible teachers, and really anyone at risk of persecution. The International Press Institute was so concerned about this risk that it placed a full-page ad in the Washington Post. Independent security experts around the world also warned in February that they could face criminal persecution for just doing their work protecting IT systems from cyber criminals under the draft of the convention. And frankly, if you have a cell phone, you might want to turn it off because they listen to us, and anything you say while they're listening can and will be used against you according to this proposed change in the Charter. And since, according to this agreement, quote, crimes will include things like criticizing your leaders or persecuting minorities, this means any casual conversation about politicians you don't like, UN rules you don't like, or gangs that might be taking over your city, well, frankly, anything you talk about that the new global governance system doesn't like is now a crime. They term this misinformation or disinformation, but the idea is only their information is what will be legal. Do you realize the implications of this? Do you have any smart devices in your home? They might record these type of conversations as well. How about email? That is a permanent means of recording your thoughts. How about your neighbors overhearing your conversations even when your phone is turned off? In Matthew 24:10, Jesus said many would fall away and betray one another. So even your friends at church might turn you in if they disagree with you. And certainly those whose ministry is to be a watchman on the wall to alert others to what's happening, sort of like what we're doing right now, those ministries are going to be at extreme risk. That would be channels like the Nelson Walters channel. We would be prime targets. Independent journalists will be prime targets. If this truly is the tribulation, starting October 2nd, this shouldn't surprise any of us. Expect the powers that be to treat us like we're in the tribulation if we truly are. Because of this, Michael Brown and other community members suggested something we're calling tribulation tapes. Michael said it is time we take the 700 Nelson Walters videos available online, organize them by topic, and provide them on inexpensive flash drives so you have your own library when, not if, the Nelson channel and other similar channels are taken down. Under this new law, even the Last Days Overcomer website will probably be taken down. The only way to preserve teachings as we progress into the tribulation will be to have them on flash drive. I agree with Michael completely, so that is what we are planning to do. I'm going to spend a portion of October organizing these, quote, tribulation tapes And I should have some available, I would think, as early as November if you're interested. So where does this leave us? As we've discussed on this channel multiple times, assuming these things are passed in the Summit for the Future, a covenant with the many will be made, or better yet, enforced on the people of the world. You and I would never sign up for these new international rules like the ones we just discussed. Interestingly, the Daniel 9:27 covenant that launches the tribulation isn't made by the prince of the covenant. The Hebrew word in that verse says it's forced or enforced on the many. It's the Hebrew word gabar, meaning strong or mighty, and it's in the hefel form of the verb, which means the prince of the covenant causes this. He forces this upon the many. Exactly what we see happening right in front of our eyes. So, do we believe the tribulation is likely happening this year? Yes. Commencing on the Feast of Trumpets, October 2nd. Now, we're not saying this must happen. We're just saying it's likely that this is taking place. If that's true, does that mean only 3.5 years until the Great Tribulation? Yeah, well, if we're correct, and we're saying we may not be, but if we are correct, then yes, that's exactly what it means. And new draconian measures, like this new law coming out of the UN, just is making that all the more likely that this is truly it. Isn't this what you expect would happen in the tribulation? This is why the idea of the Tribulation Tapes Project makes so much sense to those on our channel. We'll talk more about this as we move into October, but first I want to discuss the implications of this international law on our daily lives. AI can reduce every soundbite online into text, and then scan that and every written piece of text in milliseconds. They then can apply algorithms to search out those quadrillion gigabytes of data for things that the globalist elite might not agree with. Some of this is already done. You may not know this, but the video that's linked at the end of this one was taken down a number of times. After every time it was taken down, I had to rewrite, re-record, reprocess it, until we had a version that the algorithm thought was acceptable. I'm having to do this all the time anymore. So once these laws are in place, the first level of censorship will be the online platforms. Early next year, I expect the news and teachings that you receive to be drastically changed. Channels and teachers online will comply or they'll be silenced. So I expect our news and interpretation of news to morph into a deep state approved version. And I'm thinking this happens in the first or second quarter of 2025, although could take longer, I don't know, while these laws are being implemented. The next step will be censorship of individuals. Depending on how robust AI becomes and how much data they can process, your emails and phone calls will be monitored next. Following this will be your private conversations recorded by smart devices in your phone. Even computers now have microphones. It allows them to record what is said, so don't forget they are a smart device too. It's going to be a brave new world, folks. This is how the globalists will control the masses. In typical Orwellian style, a ministry of truth will prevent information from getting out that they don't want out. I assume the online platforms that can go viral is where they're going to place most of their attention, and punishment for those opposing the cabal online will be the harshest. And isn't this exactly what you expect from a covenant that will launch the tribulation? You know, the Soviet Gulag system that imprisoned author Alexander Solzhenitsyn among millions of others is an example of what might be coming. They estimate 25 million were in these camps. Do you remember these camps that have been set up in the USA? I wonder how they might use them. So let's take a look at the video I referenced earlier, the one that answers why leaders of the nations are so willing and eager to sign up for all these new regulations that essentially take away the power of the nations that they're in charge of. It's counterintuitive, as you can imagine, yet they're doing it. So click right here to keep watching this video that I had to re-record, half a dozen times to be able to show it to you. This is an important one. Till then, this is Nelson. and I'll see you there.
On November 15, 2021, President Biden signed into law the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Deal. A PDF of this law, linked in this video's description, is over 1,000 pages long. While politicians celebrated the passage of this legislation and touted the projects it would fund, there were some things buried in that law that did not receive much media coverage. I am Dr. John Padfield. I'm a business professor and a former Indiana state representative, and this is Business Reform, where we discuss issues at the intersection of business, technology, and society. In this video, I want to discuss a couple of provisions out of this law that will have a tremendous negative impact on our privacy and quite possibly our wallets in the coming years. For example, Section 13002 of this law is entitled National Motor Vehicle Per Mile User Fee Pilot, and the law explains that a per mile user fee means a revenue mechanism that is applied to road users operating motor vehicles, and it is based on the number of miles traveled on the road. This law, celebrated by politicians on both sides of the aisle, directs the Secretary of Transportation to establish a pilot program to, quote, test the design, acceptance, implementation, and financial sustainability of a national motor vehicle per mile user fee. Today, private vehicle drivers pay the federal government 18.4 cents per gallon for every gallon of gasoline they purchase, in addition to the state taxes on gasoline, which vary from 15 to 67 cents per gallon depending on the state. While Congress could just increase the federal gasoline tax and come up with a different way of assessing usage fees for electric vehicles, they instead decided to mandate a pilot program that charges drivers by the mile driven, which is much more intrusive of our privacy. If you are wondering how the federal government will know how many miles that you drive, that is also addressed in this bipartisan law. The Secretary of Transportation is instructed to use third-party onboard diagnostic devices, smartphone applications, telemetric data collected by automakers, and motor vehicle data obtained by insurance companies. The obvious privacy concerns over this test program have been written about in detail in The Intercept, and I've included a link to that article in the description of this video. While this program is just a test pilot for now, the clear implication is this is the direction Congress wants to go in the future, and they are just working out the details. How soon will this per mile fee be forced upon every driver? I have no idea. For what it's worth, the $7.5 billion in the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure bill to help build 500,000 EV charging stations had only led to the creation of 8 charging stations as of May 2024. But let's get back to another privacy concern from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Another provision in the law can be found on page 831, Section 24220, entitled Advanced Impaired Driving Technology. The findings section gives some alarming statistics about alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents and then concludes, quote, to ensure the prevention of alcohol-impaired driving fatalities, advanced drunk and impaired driving prevention technology must be standard equipment in all new passenger motor vehicles. I have to admit I have mixed emotions over this provision. I am a long-distance road cyclist, and twice I have ridden my bike 160 miles across the state of Indiana. I am all for cracking down on impaired and distracted drivers, as they pose a serious personal safety threat to me and to the safety of countless other people. But what exactly would this impaired driving prevention technology look like, and when would it be required? Let's just say it's complicated. The law does not directly specify how the technology will work, only what it is supposed to do. To better understand what the technology will look like, we need to dig deeper. Specifically, we need to look at the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, who Congress tasked with working out the details. NHTSA was given 3 years to issue a final rule prescribing a federal motor vehicle safety standard to require motor vehicles manufactured after the effective date of that rule to have drunk and impaired driving prevention technology. NHTSA has been conducting its own assessment of driver monitoring technologies, and they have noted that camera-based driver monitoring systems have been in vehicles since 2018 for monitoring driver inattention, and that many other camera-based driving monitoring systems are used for drowsiness detection. However, the technology to measure alcohol impairment is still in the research stage. So it appears likely in the near future, all automakers will be required by the bipartisan infrastructure deal to have driver-facing cameras monitoring drivers as they drive down the road. But don't worry, I'm sure once those cameras are in place, the data they generate will never be collected, repurposed, and abused by data traffickers. Do you support Congress's plan to charge drivers based on the number of miles they drive and to require driver-facing cameras in new cars? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.
A French seaside city is grappling with severe flooding after relentless downpours turned its streets into rivers. In Cannes, people were seen desperately clinging to lampposts, while cars were swept away by powerful currents. Shocking footage shared on X, formerly Twitter, captures the coastal city submerged, with bystanders battling rushing waters as they tried to cross roads.
Oh bordel!
Météo France, the National Weather Service, issued an urgent flood warning, which remains in effect. They warned, moderate damage is expected, particularly in exposed or vulnerable areas, and for those engaging in outdoor activities. Stay alert and follow the latest weather updates. Another viral video shows trash bins floating down waterlogged streets and cars almost entirely submerged. The caption reads, "Cannes this morning, drowning in torrents of rain." Some videos even display underground parking garages and tunnels completely flooded. The Republic District has seen significant damage, with cars and streets particularly affected. According to the official city page on X, several key routes, including passages leading to Boulevard du Midi, are closed for safety.
Sinon, mon bureau est juste là, mais c'est pas comme si il y avait 3 litres d'eau, mais un petit peu quand même. Donc, si je meurs submergée par de l'eau, vous saurez pourquoi. Voilà, je ne sais pas comment je vais attendre ce.
According to La Chain Mateo, the storm dumped 26 millimeters of rain in an hour, with 18 millimeters falling in just 12 minutes, causing massive urban runoff. While the worst of the storm has passed, the aftermath has left the city in disarray, with authorities continuing cleanup efforts.
The information in the video shows an incident in Tokyo, Japan. Thick rain clouds swiftly covered the mountains in the western Kanto region this afternoon. Reports of unusually large hail began coming in from Hachioji, a city in western Tokyo. Eyewitnesses captured images of hailstones as big as oranges, causing widespread alarm. The intense hailstorm severely damaged thousands of vehicles across the city. Hundreds of homes suffered significant roof damage, with tiles ripped apart by the force of the hail. People were forced to seek shelter wherever they could, hiding under tables, cars, and nearby buildings. Streets quickly became flooded as torrential rain combined with the hail, overwhelming drainage systems. Dangerous lightning strikes added to the chaos, with several reported hits to local infrastructure.
1h15 da tarde, mais ou menos, uma chuva que passou aqui agora. Chuva de pedra, óleo fraco, óleo fumação fraco. Isso é a natureza.
Powerful gusts of wind made the situation worse, spreading the destruction further. Cans were torn from storefronts and pieces of debris littered the roads.
车没了。对啊，我们车子已经报废了。
うわ、マジか。
Damaged power lines led to widespread blackouts across several parts of Hachioji. Local authorities urged residents to remain indoors and avoid any unnecessary travel. Emergency teams are working tirelessly to clear blocked roads and restore power in affected neighborhoods. Although no injuries have been confirmed, the material damage is reported to be extensive. Some neighborhoods are still without power, with temporary blackouts affecting daily life. Cleanup efforts are already underway, with the worst-hit areas receiving immediate attention. Weather forecasters have issued warnings of additional thunderstorms approaching the region. Many residents are left in disbelief at the sheer size of the hailstones, which are highly unusual for this area. Hailstorms of this intensity are extremely rare in the Kanto region, making the event even more shocking. Social media platforms are flooded with photos and videos showcasing the devastation caused by the storm. Homes were left with shattered windows and many rooftops were destroyed in the aftermath. Schools and businesses in the impacted areas were forced to close temporarily due to the damage. Authorities are closely monitoring the weather, advising residents to stay alert for further severe conditions. Subscribe to the channel and stay up to date with the most important events related to natural disasters.
It's Monday, September 23rd, 2024, and boy, do we have an update for you. The last time we talked, we were talking about these swirling things down here in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, and we talked about the potential for one of these to be a big deal in the near future. A lot of things happened over the weekend. We got a lot of new data, and right now I can confidently say that we are within 72 hours of an approaching major hurricane likely coming towards the United States through the Gulf of Mexico, thanks to this specific swirling area right here in the Central American zone. It's a Central American gyre. It's going to move up into the Caribbean and become a hurricane very quickly. In fact, right now, as I'm recording this video, the latest National Hurricane Center update does have a 90% probability of this forming into a tropical depression or a tropical storm. By the time you're watching this video, this is probably already going to be designated as a tropical depression or tropical storm, and we're likely already going to see tropical storm watches and warnings being rolled out, especially down there in the Caribbean. And it won't be long before we start seeing those warnings up along the Gulf Coast as well. Last week when we were talking about this, there were a lot of questions. There was a lot of uncertainty around what this storm would do. And while there are still lots of questions, most of them have been answered by some of the newest data that has come in, especially last night. And the answer to those questions is somewhat concerning, especially if you have interests along the coast. What we're looking at here is very likely we're going to have a hurricane rapidly intensifying over the very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico as soon as Tuesday or Wednesday, and then that's going to make its approach to likely the Florida coast as we go later into the day on Thursday and into the day on Friday. This is the latest HAFSA model, which has done a really good job over the past few years predicting hurricane paths and intensity, and it's showing a landfall in the Big Bend area. And you can see here just how large the storm is. It's going to have a pretty large impact area. You're going to feel the impacts from this all across Florida, even if this makes landfall in the Panhandle. And you're going to feel the impacts of this very far inland as well. We're talking Georgia, South Carolina, all the way up towards the Appalachian Mountains. This is going to be a high impact storm for a lot of people. And once again, this is going to be a very fast developing system. This is the HAFSB model showing a hurricane as soon as late tomorrow into early Wednesday, coming right through the sweet spot between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba here. It's going to stay over water likely the whole time. As it goes into the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to enter an area where we have 31 degrees Celsius surface temperatures on the ocean, and it's just going to, there's nothing really stopping it from exploding, and that's exactly what happens here on the HAFSB model. We have a 908 millibar low pressure center here off the coast of Florida, predicted by one model. It's not necessarily going to be that strong, but if it is, we're talking about a category 4, maybe even higher hurricane in the danger zone, somewhere between Destin and Tampa, and anywhere in between could be in the impact zone here as we talk more about the potential path here in a moment. Don't pay too much attention to the exact placement of the center of this hurricane on any of these models today. This is going to wiggle back and forth a lot as we go forward, but the potential path is really starting to narrow down compared to where we were just the other day. And once again, we've got to talk about how large the storm's going to be. Even though it'll be Thursday or Friday before we have landfall, you're going to start to feel the impacts from this storm here in the United States as early as Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. The outer bands of this thing are going to be impacting Key West, potentially even Miami, Wednesday morning. And of course, we're going to have life-threatening rainfall and flash flooding happening around this time down there into Cuba as well. We're just going to see continued rain and deteriorating conditions across Florida as we go through Wednesday, Thursday, all the way up until landfall. In fact, Wednesday in some of these outer bands, we could already be talking about some tornadic activity, and that would obviously increase as we get closer to landfall as well. So this is going to be a very fast situation. We're going to go from right now having a potential tropical cyclone all the way to a strong hurricane in a very short period of time. So I want to make sure we get out in front of as many people as possible and talk about the potential impacts here. Once again, well inland, central Georgia, South Carolina, you guys, if this happens as modeled right now, you guys could experience a pretty significant storm here in terms of tropical storm force winds and flash flooding as we go through Friday and Saturday. Now, here's the latest projection as far as wind speeds go. It looks like we're already going to have a hurricane. A lot of the models are suggesting that we're going to have a hurricane as early as Wednesday morning here as it goes through the space between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. This will likely be called Helene. And as you can see, the HAFSA model is already suggesting that we're going to have some wind gusts up to 94 miles per hour around this time frame. And just watch how fast this thing blows up and develops over the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. By the time we get to Thursday around 2 a.m., we're talking about 150 mile per hour gusts out there, 160, 180, maybe 190 mile per hour gusts associated with this major hurricane potentially early in the morning on Thursday. And then from there, it's untelling what's going to happen. Is it going to continue to strengthen on its approach to the Big Bend area or the panhandle of Florida? Some models are even taking it a little bit farther east. Or is it going to weaken a little bit on its approach, which is, quite common for storms that take this kind of path? But even if that happens, even if it weakens during the last 6 hours on its approach, it's still likely going to make landfall as a major hurricane if the rapid intensification happens over the Gulf of Mexico like we expect it will right now. Here's a look at a little bit of a simulation of what the radar could look like from the HAFSA model. Once again, this is not exactly what it's going to look like. I just want to show you as much imagery as possible to kind of give you an idea of where we are right now. The tornado threat and the wind threat's going to be with us across all of Florida, once again, starting as early as Wednesday. But things are really going to start ramping up Thursday. And we could be talking about tornadic activity well up here into portions of Georgia. And of course, tropical storm to hurricane force winds could be felt way outside of that center of circulation. So even if this thing makes landfall in the Big Bend area, Tampa, Clearwater, maybe even farther south towards Fort Lauderdale, you guys are going to have to deal with some of the winds and some of the storm surge concerns that come along with a big hurricane like this. HAFSA model shows landfall happening around 5 p.m. on Thursday. There's a pretty good consensus there that it's going to be late in the day on Thursday when this thing comes onto land. And then, of course, this could still be a hurricane well inland into Georgia here. Definitely a tropical storm as it gets into central Georgia. Big time flooding and severe weather / tornado threat associated on the eastern side here. This is something that we're going to have to be watching and covering. Probably will be live on this channel if this goes as modeled. Wednesday doing pre-coverage, Thursday doing landfall coverage, and then maybe even Friday doing post coverage and severe weather coverage. So lots of developments here, lots of things to prepare for, and not a lot of time. So once again, if you have interests along the coasts or anywhere in the southeastern United States, right now is the time to start preparing. Now, once again, a lot of our questions have been answered about whether or not this is the real deal or not. But one of the questions that still remains is the exact placement of where the storm is going to go. The latest ensembles here show a much more tightly packed potential cyclone path. However, there's still a pretty decent margin of error. Landfall could technically still happen anywhere between Biloxi, Mississippi, and Tampa. Okay, though if you're in those areas, you need to be concerned about this. But the more central you are between those two areas, the more likely it is the storm's going to make landfall near you. I'm thinking the Big Bend area is a pretty good bet right now, but it could be a little bit farther west than that. It could be a little bit farther east. So once again, this is the latest ensembles, bunch of different models put together, and you can see that we're coming to a pretty good consensus here as to where the storm's going to go. In fact, whenever the National Hurricane Center releases their cone, which it's probably already released once again by the time you're watching this video, it'll probably look very similar to this. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind here is the intensity of this storm. Lots of models are showing this thing becoming a major hurricane between 48 hours and 72 hours from now. A couple of them are even making it up there into Category 4 status, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if we saw some Category 5s coming out of some of these models. One of the things that's really going to have a large impact on the exact placement and intensity of this storm is the big upper level trough here that's going to be kind of steering Helene as it comes towards the United States. So the reason why this thing's able to rapidly intensify at all is because of the open area here on the eastern side. There's a good outflow channel, which could very much so let the storm increase in intensity very quickly. So that's why we expect that there's going to be some rapid intensification. However, the closer this thing gets to Florida, the more interaction it's actually going to have with this trough. And that's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to just kind of take a hint from the trough and be pushed a little bit farther to the east. So that means that it could be a little bit more of a concerning situation for places like Tampa. Or it could, especially if it doesn't increase in intensity as much as we think it will over the Gulf, it could be influenced by it in terms of becoming more attracted to it, weakening a little bit more, and then coming up a little bit farther north. So it really just depends on how strong it is down here before it starts interacting with this trough. That's going to determine how the trough dictates what happens with the storm. So if it's a really strong hurricane, it's likely just going to get pushed a little bit farther to the east. If not, then it might weaken a little bit and get pulled up a little bit farther to the north. So this is something that we're watching very closely right here. I don't see why it wouldn't become a strong hurricane. We do expect that rapid intensification to happen. So I'm leaning towards maybe a little bit farther east. We've got to be concerned about a potential landfall here. So the Big Bend area, I don't think we're going to get as far as Tampa, but it's on the table. Keep that in mind. And then of course, once we get done with landfall and everything that comes along with that, we're going to be watching this thing go all the way up through Georgia, South Carolina, up into the Appalachian Mountains. It's going to continue to be causing problems Friday and Saturday. And this is something that we're going to have to cover likely through the weekend before the energy from the storm completely fizzles out. Lots of flash flooding, winds, the tornado potential is going to be high in a lot of different places. So this is something that we're going to be watching very closely all week, and it's going to be our main focus. So right now, if nothing changes, and by the way, things could change. All of this model data that we're looking at right now is completely driven by satellite imagery and buoys and stuff like that. We haven't had any Hurricane Hunter data implemented into the models yet. That's not going to happen until later this evening. That's going to add a little bit more accuracy to the forecast, and it could change things completely. It could change the path, it could change the projected intensity, and I'll let you know first thing tomorrow about what kind of updates we have there. If things don't change much at all, I'm going to have a video tomorrow. It's possible that we go live Wednesday as a pre-stream, because I keep talking about how by the time this video goes up, this, and this has already happened. Covering rapidly developing situations like this makes more sense in a live stream format, I think, than a video. So if things are going the way that it looks like they're going to go on Wednesday, we're probably going to be live Wednesday. We'll be live Thursday, obviously, covering landfall. And then we may even be live Friday covering post-landfall and the potential severe weather that continues up the East Coast associated with this storm. So pretty busy. Once again, don't be scared. Be prepared. The best case scenario here is that we get a Category 2, low-end Category 3, making landfall, hopefully decreasing in intensity because it's interacting with that trough. It is unfortunately going to happen somewhere in Florida, I think. So we can deal with that, right? We know how to handle that. So I just hope that everybody watching this is preparing, going over their hurricane evacuation plans, and doing everything they can to mitigate the risks associated with a storm like this. I don't want it to catch you off guard. This is the kind of storm where people will say that we had no idea it's coming, even though we've been talking about it forever, and now we've got plenty of lead time to actually take action. So I'm going to get to work here preparing for this. Of course, we've got Storm Chaser Caleb Beecham going down there in Halt Force 1, and I'm going to have lots of updates over on Twitter. Make sure you follow me over there and subscribe to this channel, turn notifications on, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. Ooh.
Hey, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a start of the work week. Monday has come upon us already. About 12:03 p.m. here. September 23rd, 2024 is the date. So local time in California, 12:03 p.m. afternoon. Hope everyone's enjoying their Monday out there. We're going to start off with earthquake activity here in California. It looks like it's ramping up slightly here in the last 24 hours with a handful of earthquakes above the 2.5 threshold. The most recent one, a 2.6 up around the Redding area. The Southern California earthquake area, 2.9, just around the Long Beach area, off of the Santa Monica area, the Santa Monica fault. There's a Malibu fault over here. This earthquake in an area that we really haven't seen earthquake activity here recently. Obviously, we've seen some around the, or we've had a few earthquakes around the Puente Hills stress fault underneath downtown Los Angeles area. That's a little bit further up here. So now we're getting some of these other fault systems hit. This appears to be off of the Newport Inglewood Rose Canyon fault. I can't really zoom in much closer, or potentially the Chinook fault. Chinook, it looks like. Goodness. So anyway, California's got so many fault systems out here, it's a little scary. Southern California specifically. And that's where we've been seeing a lot of earthquake activity here in the past couple months. Today, a 2.9, a new earthquake in a new area. That's the only one so far. Again, it's underneath this area of the Inglewood region and a highly populated area. Nothing going on across the Malibu Coast Fault or the Puente Hills Stress Fault. Malibu Coast Fault looks pretty quiet there today. One earthquake Oh, looks like there was another earthquake, 1.6, following this event this morning, literally 2 minutes later, further up north. That one appears to be on the Inglewood Fault, Newport Inglewood Fault. So I've noticed this pattern here of pressurization up against the plate boundary. And it makes sense here where the general stress is coming from, the interaction of the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate boundary, right? But look at all these ridges out here, these fault systems here that show that the strain builds up in this type of fashion here. And that's where we've been seeing a lot of the earthquake activity ramp up here recently, mainly across the Garlock Fault southward for Southern California and a little bit up north here as well. And that would explain why we're seeing strain, earthquake strain up here across the Garlock Fault shear zone, because it's pretty much, it seems like it's locked out here, right about the Big Bend area of the Garlock Fault shear zone southward. But some of that pressurization is picking up here on this little piece of land that looks like an arrow, a left-pointing arrow here. It's adding strain up here across this shear zone. And the only thing I can think of here is that this whole area is under a bunch of pressure, plate tectonic pressure out here, and of course that would be associated with the San Andreas Fault. We're seeing numerous other small fracture areas, like we've been seeing the last couple months, show elevated activity, and it's just a sign here of the extreme pressure on the San Andreas Fault itself. So got to watch that. Definitely have to watch that. A handful of smaller quakes out here as well. In the Fontana earthquake swarm area, looks like this is starting to kick back up again as well. Nothing above 2.5, right? So when you remove all the earthquakes under 2.5, it looks like California is having a quiet day, but that's not the case. We got the earthquake activity here across the Inglewood area around the one of these other fault systems here that really hasn't seen a lot of earthquake activity recently. The Fontana area, yes, they've had a number of earthquakes out here. We would have to go back beyond the last 30 days to see the elevated activity out here. At least in that region, in the last 30 days around this area of the Fontana earthquake swarm, which is further west, that is still showing up here in the last 30 days with about 56 earthquakes. So maybe it looks like a new area here around this region that's seeing some seismic swarming. I really don't think that this area specifically right here had any earthquake activity in the last couple months. It's been this region. Got a little distracted there. The Rancho Cucamonga area up north, this is our swarming area over the last month. So this is actually a new swarming area. Somewhat same location, roughly about 5 miles from each other in that swarm fashion. There's a lot going on out here right now, folks, and it's kicking back up, it appears, today. This current ongoing earthquake swarm, 1 mile south of Fontana. Largest earthquake so far in the sequence is going to be a couple 2-pointers out there. Very shallow earthquake activity here, just below the surface, anywhere between 1 to 2 miles there underneath this area. Not big earthquake activity, but it's a sequence of earthquakes that we're seeing here over the last couple months that are leading up to the San Andreas Fault here. Or it could be any of these other faults that are well overdue. One thing I've noticed for sure is that various areas are kicking up. It's not just one specific area of earthquake activity. We're getting these areas that haven't been hit in a little while. Then we'll go through a little quiet period like we've seen here over the last 4 days, right? Probably 4 days, 5 days of quietness. Now it's starting to kick back in new areas of activity. Like down here across Inglewood, and a new separate swarm here east of our previous swarm that we've seen here in the last 30 days. So things are kicking up again in various different areas. And one of these times when the clock comes back around again here, the pressure, it could trigger something out here bigger. And it's all pretty much pointing towards the San Andreas Fault here on the large-scale basis. I've seen the activity halt roughly about, remember the 5.2 we've seen back in what's been past, almost coming up on 2 months now, up there around the Bakersfield area. Let me double-check my mic, make sure it's up. Audio, yep, we're good. And that area is just north here of this Garlock Fault shear zone where we would expect to see some strain due to the overall plate boundary strain. A lot of activity up north here. We've seen a trail of earthquake activity here towards the Ridgecrest area. That's been, looks like it's still ongoing here today with its own little separate swarm. And you can pretty much follow that fashion there, an arrow. And this inside this area, inside this line between the Garlock Fault shear zone and the San Andreas Fault, we haven't seen a lot of earthquake activity. Minimal, some microquakes across areas where we'd expect some of the strain to transfer to immediately off the plate boundary, and that's going to be these faults here just off the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. So, you know, this is just the last 30 days. You can see that well-defined arrow down here. More specifically, though, right up against the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault. That's a fact. Last 24 hours actually have been quite active out here across the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault as well, with a handful of smaller microquakes. Now, got to remember, just because they're not above 2.5, it does not mean that it's not an earthquake, and it doesn't have a purpose, right? Obviously, there's a lot of earthquake activity out here in the microquake department, and there's still earthquakes. And they're all pointing to the same feature that I've been seeing over here the last couple months, and that is the San Andreas Fault. A lot of stuff leading to it, I believe. We're starting to see some signs. Just on it here, a couple smaller earthquakes from yesterday and today. As you can see, zoom in here just a little bit. 0.8 this morning. Looks like one just after midnight. Further down south here near the Banning area, that is just off the San Andreas Fault, the southern segment, by literally a couple miles as well. Seen a handful of earthquakes in this region this morning already. And San Jacinto Fault Zone down here looks fairly active. This is almost always active, though. That and the Elsinore Fault over here. A couple different secondary fault systems here on the Pacific side of the plate boundary. The Salton Sea, pretty quiet. Nothing going on across there for now. It's all been focused up north here. Roughly Garlock Fault shear zone southward. So we'll keep an eye on today. It looks like we're definitely kicking things up out here in a couple different regions. Some areas that we've seen earthquake activity before in the last couple months, some not so much, like this activity over here around the Inglewood area near the Los Angeles airport. Goodness. So watch this very closely here today. Up north, we've seen a handful of earthquakes as well around the Parkfield segment of the San Andreas Fault, which is that's a creeping segment. Parkfield's going to be a little bit further down. Let's see here. I wish that thing would just stay up right here. It almost looks like there's a gap there between the creeping segment and the Parkfield section. But on the southern end here, the extreme southern end of the Parkfield section, we have a couple smaller earthquakes here in the last hour and one from early this morning. There's been a little chat here that if we see a 6-pointer on here, and we're pretty much overdue for a 6-pointer. They kick up about every 20 to 22 years or so, and the last one was back in 2004, 2006, if I remember right. I think 2004. There's been a little bit of chat, though, on if we get a 6-pointer down here on the southern segment, that could be just enough to unzip the rest of the plate boundary down here, the San Andreas Fault. The southern segment, that's very capable right now of producing an 8.1 earthquake. That is not a joke. That is the magnitude that seismologists, geologists alike tend to believe and feel that that's how much strain has been built up here across the southern segment. A little bit further up north along the creeping section of the San Andreas Fault. This is earlier this morning for a 2.9. Handful of smaller quakes out there as well. The latest of 1.7 within the vicinity of that 2.9. And well, watch Nevada. It looks like Nevada's starting to kick up a little bit as well out here across western Nevada. They tend to coincide with the earthquake activity uptick here across Southern California, as noted in the past. We've seen a lot of earthquake activity here, along with movement in Southern California recently. So we'll keep an eye on it. Definitely kicking up here. Northern California, Bay Area, fairly quiet. Only a handful of very small earthquakes. Northern California, outside of Redding. This is the northern end of the Sacramento Valley. The majority of these quakes here relatively shallow, aside from a 2.2 underneath Whiskeytown. There's fault systems up here. not associated with Mount Shasta. That's well up north. And Mount Lassen over here as well, not associated with that. But aside from that, somewhat quiet there in northern Cal. There's that swarm of earthquake activity out here near the Desert Air area, near the Yakima Ridge, east of Yakima here, a little distance at the very edge of this mountain range. Now, I was looking to see if this may be volcanic, but I don't feel it is. 43 earthquakes in the last 24 hours here. And if we were to include the last 7 days, that brings it up to 67 earthquakes in a separate swarm. A swarm. Really no main quake out there. A main quake would be, say, a 3 or a 4, and then we get a whole bunch of these little aftershocks occurring following the main quake. But that's not the case here. This is just a bunch of various magnitude earthquakes all occurring in the swarm fashion here. And it kicked up pretty much big time last night. There was a little bit of earthquake activity there on the 21st. So yeah, actually over the last 3 days here, we've seen that on the uptick out here. And a little uncertain onto where it's leading to. There's no historical data out here in terms of 4.5 and above. So a little odd. I don't think there's any fracking operations out there. I'm not seeing anything. Those look like maybe not windmills, but I don't know what those are. Hard to say what that is, but I don't see any type of fracking operations out there. Little odd earthquake activities, say the least. Yeah, pretty obvious though. Look at California out here. You know, when you look up close, you think, man, this is a long ways from Los Angeles over here to Las Vegas. But on the bigger scale of things, this is one plate, the Pacific Plate, and the North American Plate up here, massive plate. So this little bitty area, that really means, you know, that it means a lot to us, right, in terms of coverage and distance. But this is just a small fraction of the plate boundary out here that can produce an 8.1. So you see these signs outside of the plate boundary area indicative of the strain and stress that's coming on to California right now. It's definitely kicking up across this general area. So got to be on guard here today. Hopefully, well, I'm going to be down here. I'm going to be down here in a couple days, checking out some various fault systems in the landslide area around the Rancho Palos Verdes area, and maybe stop in and have some seafood up there around Malibu. Quite a few folks been recommending some places up there. Appreciate it. But we're going to go down there mainly on a business trip to check out, talk to people, see how they've been dealing with the recent erosion and landslide activity there across this region. Also around the Malibu area, where we're seeing a lot of earthquake activity recently on the Malibu Coast Fault. That's capable of producing a large quake in itself. I mean, it's all over the place where we're expecting some larger activity. Anything could go at any time, including while we're down there. But we'll be live streaming and documenting our travels and journey down there. All right, away from California,